Well, good morning, everybody. This is the April meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee, and I'm the chair for now, John Kelly. Happy to see everybody here. I understand we have potentially about 5 or 6 folks that are going to be online, and that's good. So we do have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started. I think, Julia, if you will call the roll, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So those online, if you can unmute when I call your name. I see we have a few online. I'll give it a few seconds, but Richard Farias, Lawson Picasso, we know is on her way. Diana Martinez, Frank Gonzalez, Cliff Soloway, Raquel Zapata,
Present.
Dr. Cantu,
Present.
John Kelly,
Here.
Tom Corser,
Here.
Vanessa Alvarado,
Present.
Bill Day,
Here.
Mayor Dennis, Steve Bonnet, Andrea Clapsaddle, and Bob Zapata.
Thank you, Julia. And so now we will move on to the invocation. If you could please bow your heads for just a moment, please. For a quiet moment, I invite you to express gratitude for our health, our families, and our friends, and the opportunity to come together as a community today. We honor our committee members for their responsibility that they bear, and we wish them success today in pursuing their endeavors with wisdom and humility. We are reminded that we are all stewards acting on behalf of our customers. May we accomplish our goals together with that singular purpose in mind. Thank you. And so now we will move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
All right. So I believe our first order of business is to approve the meeting minutes from our February 2023 meeting. We did not have an official meeting last month in March, so this is our recent meeting minutes. So I'll entertain a motion.
To approve.
John, point of discussion.
Sure.
I think the meeting minutes were fine. They reflect kind of what happened. I don't know if, and my question is for discussion, not a request, but for discussion, is should the meeting minutes reflect the discussions that we have around the topics? I think it does a great job of highlighting the detail of the agenda and what the speaker spoke about or what have you, but does not reflect discussion. And I'm just wondering if this forum, it should reflect that discussion. The reason I bring that up is our purpose,
Right.
is to provide feedback to CPS, right? And that discussion is that feedback. So I put out there that question about whether our minutes should reflect some notion of our discussion for those CPS employees that aren't in attendance. That's it.
Well, and Tom, even maybe for the board members, if they were interested in what discussions that we had, not that they necessarily would, but they might be interested to hear what our comments were. I'm open to input from the rest of the committee.
Just a question for the staff. What level of note taking are we capable of, and how much of that discussion can we capture?
In the past, we had provided minutes that were very, very detailed. And then when we moved to recording the meetings and posting them, we raised them up a little bit because of the availability of the recording, that anyone could go back and listen to it in more detail. However, we're open to feedback as well. And if we kind of need to find a more of a middle space there to where the feedback that was given is more clearly captured, we can definitely entertain that.
I'd be okay with that.
This is Adelita. One suggestion maybe is making a recording and making that recording available.
We are currently doing that. We post the recording within about, I want to say about 4 days after the conclusion of the meeting. So again, anyone can go back and listen to the recording and hear all of the discussion and all of the feedback. But again, if we need to find a middle ground to where the minutes, capture a little bit more of the robust conversation, we can definitely look at that.
Yeah, I think that's acknowledged, right? There's one extreme where you don't publish any of the discussion, the other extreme where you have the recording, right? And so an executive with CPS would want to say, all right, what is the CAC had a presentation on this topic. How did they opine on it, right? And they could listen to it for an hour and a half, right? Or they could find some middle ground and say, Bill Day brought up this topic. I'm going to go see kind of what he said. Might be a more efficient way for them to fish into understand that topic. That's all. So I think that middle ground is the right idea.
Thank you. Julia?
Frank has his hand up. Frank, online, go ahead.
For clarification, this is in talks of last month when we went to visit the legislation day, correct?
No, this is in regards to the minutes to the February meeting.
Okay, well, in that sense, since the meetings are published, wouldn't a after action report suffice to talk about topics and discussions, and what was the conclusion at the end?
The minutes are currently, capturing the topics and the discussion at a high level. Again, we began abbreviating, the level of detail on the minutes because of the availability of the recording. The suggestion on the table is to kind of find a middle ground to where, the meetings are not as high level, but not super detailed either, to accommodate the availability of the recording.
Yvonne, I guess I would offer a comment. I think that I've always said I'm a compromise kind of guy, and I think that the idea of kind of a middle ground makes a lot of sense to me. That way, if we have enough detail of what sort of reaction the presentation got from the CAC membership, if there's at least a little bit of a response there, then if somebody is interested enough to pursue it some more, they've got the opportunity to do that. So I would maybe suggest maybe we add a little more detail, a little more context, perhaps.
Yes, sir, we can do that gladly.
Well, I think, Bill, that's a good point. I'd say just moving forward in future.
Beginning with this meeting.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Zapata?
Yes, ma'am. I do tend to agree with that as well, having more content in there. But one thing I'm used to is actions and decisions. I know there's not a lot of that goes on here, but typically any actions and decisions that come out of this meeting should be incorporated in the meeting minutes.
Absolutely. Votes taken and the outcomes therein are included. Right. Well, thank you all for the feedback. Thank you very much.
The motion and the second that we didn't handle. The motion and the second.
Right.
Sorry.
So we need to,
Parliamentarian.
need to vote on the approval of the minutes, please. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, Yvonne, I believe you're next up for the staff update.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair Kelly. All right, so moving on to the agenda slide. So there has been a significant amount of activity and events over the past few weeks, and I'm just going to go over I'm going to go over some high-level items here that reflect that activity. So here you can see the things that we'll be talking about. The first thing is regarding the state legislature. So I'm sure you all have been seeing these headlines. This is just a sample, but I'm sure you all have been seeing the recent headlines, and these represent just a few of the many bills that our federal and state relations team members in Austin are tracking and studying. Clearly, the energy industry is a leading theme for the 88th state legislature. In addition to our state and our federal and state relations team, our energy market policy team has also been very heavily engaged in the work that ERCOT and the PUC and the legislature is undertaking related to energy market redesign. You may recall that before the legislature convened, our federal and state team came and gave you all a briefing, and our energy market policy team came and gave you all a briefing. And so we are working to come back when the legislature, ends at the end of May. We're looking to bring the teams back in June to give you all a briefing on the outcomes, of the legislature. So I think that's going to be a very fruitful discussion. Again, we're targeting that for the month of June. All right, next page. All right, I will turn it over now to Julia, who will give, just a briefing, if you will, on the legislative day from last month with the committee.
Thanks, Yvonne. So on March 15th, 9 of our members were able to attend a CAC legislative day and go to Austin. We had the opportunity to meet with several legislators and some of our trade industry associates and visit the Capitol. So we started off our day at lunch, where we heard from our lobby consultants from the Phoenix Group. That picture there, where we're all seated at the tables, where you can see the president of the Texas Public Power Association, TPPA, Shelley Botkin, as well as their general counsel, Taylor Kilroy. They led a very insightful discussion on the role of PUC and ERCOT and the relationship between the two. And I think, at least from the members and the feedback I heard, that it was a lot of good information, and she was able to explain, I guess, again, the role of the two. Then we made our way over to the Capitol, and they're pictured there on the right are the 4 legislators that we were able to get some FaceTime with. Senator Menendez, Senator Roland Gutierrez, Senator Judith Zaffarini all stepped off the Senate floor and met with our CAC members in the hallway. It was, they were in the middle of a floor hearing, so we took the time when we could get to talk to them and hear from them. They expressed appreciation for the CAC's efforts, participation, and overall support for the community involvement that this group has. Later in the afternoon, walking around the Capitol, we ran into Representative Barbara Gervin-Hawkins there, pictured with Mayor Dennis. And the committee was also able to sit in on a couple of committee hearings. So the CAC members attended a House Committee on State Affairs and a House Committee on County Affairs. We did run into Commissioner Justin Rodriguez, who was also present for the County Affairs Committee hearing. And we got to just, walk around and tour the Capitol. So overall, I think it was a very fruitful day and productive day for the CAC members. And I'll turn it over to Chair Kelly for any additional comments or feedback on this day.
Thank you, Julia. That's a great recap. I think that that Kathy and with our group up in Austin did a great job. We appreciate all the staff effort that put the activity together for us. It was very worthwhile, in my opinion. Of course, as I told Bill, that's easy for me to say since I'm retired, but it really was a good day. I think it was quite worth the time, and I thought it was very informative. One thing I would just mention, when we were talking to the senators who had stepped out of the chamber, Senator Menendez and Senator Gutierrez had both talked to us and were concerned at that point in time. There's still a proposed bill in the legislature that would constrain or limit in some way municipal utilities from being able to contribute to their governmental entity, the city, county, or whatever that they're a part of. There was some constraints proposed on that. And that was something that was a big concern at the time we were there. So I know it's apparently, from what's in the newspaper these days, it's still something that's out there. So that's something that that could certainly be a concern. But overall, I thought it was a great day, a great opportunity to visit with folks. So I don't know if, I think that's about it, but if anybody else that was on the trip wants to add some comments, please feel free. Anybody else?
Just a quick thank you again to CPS, the staff, and those in Austin. It was, I thought, a very productive day. So thank you all for making it happen.
Well, you're very welcome. And our Austin team, as you can well imagine, they are quite engaged today at the state capitol, but we will be sure to pass the sentiment along. Thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. I was really impressed by the proficiency and the professionalism of the staff that CPS has in Austin. I think there's a lot of good folks there that are working hard on our behalf.
If I could ask those that attended the ERCOT meeting that you had, I was most interested in that. Any color or comments that came out of those discussions that you can share? Be very interested in that.
Well, we didn't really get a chance to visit with ERCOT staff as we had intended, or our people that are interacting with ERCOT, because they were actually having a meeting the day we were up there. So we were not able to actually have that meeting that we had hoped to have, Tom. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. I think that was a good recap. Thank you.
And now, Chair Kelly, for any comments that you'd like to make relative to the State of the Energy event.
Sure. The presentation that some of us were able to attend at the North Chamber was excellent as well. It was a discussion with Rudy and the new head of ERCOT, Pablo Vegas. I thought the presentation was really good. We've kind of heard from Rudy before, but the information that we heard from Pablo was very interesting. I actually got a chance to visit with him for 4 or 5 minutes after the presentation was over with. And one thing I've always, in my opportunities when I have managed different groups, I've always tried to look at things from a new perspective. And the thing that always sets me off if somebody says, well, we've always done it this way, that's the first key to me, is we need to take a look at that. So Pablo actually made that same comment. And I think the fact that he's come to Texas from out of state and has doesn't have any Texas background to speak of, I think that's really helpful. I think he's come into the situation with fresh eyes, and told him as much that I felt like that was a real asset for us, and that we were looking forward to his leadership at ERCOT. I was impressed. I think most of you know I've had my questions or concerns about ERCOT, but I'm cautiously optimistic that Mr. Vegas will be a big improvement for them.
Chair Kelly, I'd also like to note that we have received the link to the recording of the event, so we will be sharing that with the committee after this meeting. So for those of you that were unable to attend or did attend and want to hear it again, that'll be made available to you. So, but I thought it was a really good discussion as well. It seemed like those that were in attendance were very, very engaged in soaking it all up. So, all right, that will lead us to our next slide, please. So upcoming events, there's going to be a lot of activity over the next, like 6 to 8 weeks or so that you can see here, with everything from rate advisory to board to our municipal election day. Early voting starts on the 24th. Your next committee meeting is on the 10th. So we will regroup with the executive committee to talk about topics, for that session, or maybe that's something that you all might talk about during roundtable. And then on May the 23rd, CPS Energy will be on the agenda for the Municipal Utilities Committee meeting. The committee chair and city staff will be meeting, I'm going to say maybe, if not later this month, the beginning of May, to plan the agenda. But we will most certainly be the ones on that agenda, because the MUC, what they do is they swap. So one meeting is SAWS, one meeting is CPS Energy. So we are next in the queue. So stand by for that. Next slide, please. All right, so today we have two briefings for you. One is on the state of cyber and physical security, and another briefing will take place in executive session where the committee will receive a litigation update briefing. And these are our presenters for today. And Chair Kelly, I will hit pause, and when you're ready for us to move on to our first speaker, I will do the introduction.
Well, I think we're probably ready to go. We may be just a tad bit ahead of schedule, so that's unusual for us. So let's don't waste it. No, we're looking forward to the presentation today. I know that there are some things that we can't really reveal about our security for CPS, but I think that we're all concerned about cyber and physical security because we've seen instances of both that are troubling. So we're looking forward to this presentation. Thank you.
Right. Any other comments or questions from the committee before we introduce our first speaker? All right. So I will do the introduction for our first speaker, and then when we move on to our next set of speakers, I'll do the intros then. Okay. All right. So I am very pleased to welcome for the first time briefing this committee, Mr. Jonathan Homer. As our Chief Security Officer, he oversees cyber and physical security as well as business continuity. He joined CPS Energy in March of 2022 and has over 20 years experience with the cyber and IT industry, specializing in industrial control systems and incident response. Most recently, Jonathan built out the federal government's cyber incident response teams within the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency known as CISA. Jonathan has a master's degree in technology management and his Chief Information Officer certificate from the International Academy of CIO. He maintains a number of certifications, including ISC2, CISSP, and ProSci Advanced Change Management Practitioner, and was recently recognized globally in 2016 by the SANS Institute with the People Who Made a Difference in Cybersecurity Award. So thank you, Jonathan, for being here.
Awesome. Thank you. It's always interesting to listen to a bio be read about yourself, right? It's good. This is a good crowd to be able to be here, and I'm grateful to be able to be with you this morning. We're still this morning for a few more minutes in that space. I'd like to take just a few minutes and give you my perspective on where we as a company, where we as a city are at for both cyber and physical security, and then definitely leave some time to answer any questions that you might have for me. A little bit of background on myself, but also a little bit of background on security as a whole. So as the bio said in lots of big words and acronyms and other things, I do come from a cyber background, right? I'm fairly new to CPS of about a year ago. I did come from the federal government. And so I bring with that a understanding of critical infrastructure at the national level. I tend to look at the threats about not so much about the what are we facing in the day-to-day moment or where could we suffer a small intrusion, but what does a really bad day for the nation look like? I'm more concerned about the city of San Antonio than I am the company of CPS Energy. Our job is to support the city, and that's our primary function. And so looking at the threat profile, where are we at as a nation? Where are we at as a city? Within my portfolio here at CPS, I have both the physical security as well as the cybersecurity departments and the responsibilities that fall in from there. And what do we face? Let's talk about cyber for just a minute and kind of how it's evolved and where it's become and then where we find ourselves today. Cyber, when we look back, cyber is a term that used to be kind of a vague concept that was kind of a geeky, nerdy thing that only certain people could understand the words to do. And yet it's become a very relevant part of all of our lives at a human personal level. As we think about those things. If we go back far enough, we can go back to what we used to call the hackers and what we called the freakers. That's a politically correct term. The freakers of the 1970s, when hacking was about free phone calls from payphones, right? It was take the Captain Crunch whistle and blow it on the phone, and you get a free phone call, and you saved yourself 25 cents. That was a hack back then. And I look forward to like the 80s and the 90s when we talked about things like Stuxnet, when we talked about massive attacks, but it was very sophisticated, very intentional, very rare types of approach. And Stuxnet was the situation, for those of you who aren't familiar, that was where a hack went into the uranium processing plants of Iran and caused the centrifuges to essentially spin too fast, right? And self-destruct. That was a game-changing event in the world of cyber because it demonstrated that someone from a keyboard can cause disruption and destruction to significant industrial capabilities. And that was a turning point for us. Second thing I want to talk about is Saudi Aramco. Saudi Aramco happened roughly 5 years ago, maybe not quite that. And that is where hackers went into a system. And they went into an industrial control system. The difference of an IT system and an ICS system, IT is your laptop, spreadsheet, corporate email, things like that. That's all the IT traditional computers. Industrial control systems are what all of industry, and we here at CPS Energy have, running our power plants and our transformers. They have a very different construct and mentality and just the way they function in that space. In Saudi Aramco, the hackers went in and they changed the safety system of the industrial control system. And the safety system has one function and one function only, and it is the safety system of last resort, that if all other things fail, it is the one that safely shuts down the plant to protect the personnel and to protect the plant itself. The hackers get into the safety system and through some pretty sophisticated ways, disable the safety protections so that if the plant had had a problem, or if the hackers have been able to get into other systems and cause problems, that the things that the company counted on to save them at the last minute would not have saved them. And that's a turning point in cyber. And then last of all, I want to talk about where we're at today with Russia and Ukraine. Russia has, we've known for years and have recognized that Russia, China, and let's add Iran and North Korea to the mix. They are the cyber foes, the main cyber foes of the United States, right? And so prior to Ukraine, prior to what we read about on the news, they were the ones that we talked about at the national level and even at critical infrastructure level. They're the ones who had the big capabilities to create big damage we needed to really protect ourselves against. And so we've watched that. We've also watched, there's a whole hacker community, and it's not really a community. There's a whole bunch of hackers out in the world, right? And they're doing bad things. And they target everybody. But it's not that all hackers attack everyone. It's that they attack the ones either that they're paid to attack or the ones that they feel motivated to attack. Might be a personal vengeance or some other reason, right? So prior to Russia and Ukraine's war that's happening over there, the hackers of the world were fairly evenly split. And all I mean by that is hackers attacked whoever it is they thought they attacked. But when Russia attacked Ukraine, we saw a divisive turn in the cyber community. We saw a number of those kind of scattered coalesce. And now there tends to be those that side with Russia, and it's a pretty small number, and those that side with the rest of the world. And that's a pretty generic term. But conceptually, the hacker community kind of polarized. And we saw these hackers that were going after everyone focus their efforts on going against Russia. And then we saw a few of them that had been focused on other things go on and they become what we call pro-Russian hackers, right? Kind of effort. But that's a very small community. That was a polarizing kind of event for us at CPS Energy and in America, et cetera, because instead of having to defend against a whole bunch of random low frequency threats, now we're protecting more against a little bit more targeted, but it's also a lower frequency. So the war in Ukraine has actually turned the hacking community to lower the volume of cyber attacks. That's the positive side of the coin. The other flip side of the Russia conversation is that Russia has used cyber warfare, has used cyber capabilities, computers, keyboards, things like this, to disrupt Ukraine. They've demonstrated that cyber can go in and mess with a power plant. They can mess with a grid. They can mess with things. And they do it different ways and different techniques. I don't think that we have seen in Ukraine all of the capabilities that the world has to offer. I don't think the worst of the worst has been exposed. But I do think that hackers in their individual minds and even at the nation state kind of levels, we went past a barrier, an artificial barrier, but it used to be hackers would go so far but then stop. And I think we've gone past that as a world. So we've said it's okay now in certain circumstances, and I think Russia and Ukraine, it's okay when war has been declared to go take out an opponent's power grid. Well, that's a decisive change for here at CPS, right? So when I talk about cybersecurity here at CPS Energy, there are two common major groups of threats that I want to talk about. The first is what I call low-hanging fruit. And what I mean by that is if we don't do our due diligence, if we have a weakness that we should have taken care of, and hackers, generic hackers, are out there scanning the internet, and they find a weakness that we haven't yet patched or something else, and we become the easiest victim to compromise, they'll be glad to compromise us, right? That's our job to make sure we defeat what I'll call the easier. And it's not always easy. It's a very complex business, but it's our job to protect against those. Those are commodity hackers. They scan, they find, they exploit, and we go through from there. There's also some in-betweens. I'm going to talk about the really sophisticated here in just a second, but there's some in-betweens. There are people who go out, there are hackers who go out there and they'll hack because they want to steal money. Now, I don't know how much you get to see into the internal finances of CPS Energy. We have some money, but we are not a bank. We are not filthy rich that has lots of gold in the archives to go steal, right? And so we're not a organization that it makes a lot of sense for a hacker to invest heavily into to steal our money. Or if they hack in, there's not that much they get to take, right? Kind of things. So we generally don't get a financial motivation hack target that goes to great extremes. There's also political hacking, right? When they say politically I want to, or what we call hacktivism, they're out there to prove a point. Kind of efforts. We try and keep our head down. And I think we do a decent job of not being out there and attracting enemies, so to say, in that effort at the hacker level. And so we generally don't have to deal with those. We also don't have a lot of intellectual property. There's not a lot of super secret stuff in the networks of CPS Energy. Other companies have it. Coca-Cola's got a huge, great secret. We all talk about it, right? They have lots of hackers who want the Coca-Cola recipe. All right, well, we don't have that at CPS Energy. If you think there's something hidden in the vaults, please tell me. I should know about those things. We don't have that, and so we don't get those kind of hacks coming in against us. But what do we have? We have the 7th largest city depending upon us. And we know that power is critical. And not only do we know, and not only do our citizens know, our enemies know that too. They know that if they can cut off the power that CPS Energy provides, it's a major disruption for the economy of San Antonio, for the economy of Texas, honestly, for the nation as a whole, right? They know that's there. And so when I talk to my team and when we strategize and build our cyber defenses, we talk about defending against the low-lying threats, the commodity scans of the internet, and we talk about nation-state, sophisticated, major, clearly breaching over some of those kind of perceptions. How do we prepare for really, really bad days? And how do we make sure we're secure against the other stuff? And that's the cyber profile that we talk about. And it blends with, and there's a reason that we take security at CPS Energy and we merge them together, physical and cyber, because the difference of a Russia or a China hacking in versus them sneaking someone in the back door versus them bringing in guns blazing through the front isn't all that different in a time of really bad days. And so we take our approach and we learn from the intelligence that we have available. We plan and prepare and we evaluate the risks that are that we're present with, what systems are most vulnerable, where are key assets, those things, and make sure we defend those with the most sophistication, the most defensive techniques in that effort. All of that gets blended together into a story that we then weave and make investments to make sure that a few things. One, the power doesn't get disrupted. That's the most critical thing we do, to make sure that that power keeps flowing. We also make sure that we know how to recover, because as we all know, the power goes off, ice falls on trees and limbs fall and other things happen and you lose some power. We want to make sure that we have plans and are organized to be able to respond. So whether that is because a hacker gets into a network or it's because a hurricane brings an ice storm, brings a tree on top of a line, we need to be organized in getting that recovered as quickly as possible. And then we also make sure we understand cascading effects. We need to understand that if a system gets affected, what other systems down the stream can't operate. And I think if we look back, we saw that, right? We know that if there's no power for the city, then water pumps couldn't run. And then you have two things that are impacted, not just one. And so we've talked about as a city what we're doing to mitigate that. We look at that in a numerous different ways. We talk about our interdependencies with ERCOT, et cetera, in those kind of efforts. The other element that we can talk about from physical security, and physical security mirrors cyber in many ways, we have the same concept. So I have the protect against a major physical intrusion of some sort. We also have a couple things. We have fishermen who like to fish in our lakes. It's amazing, right? And so we have that, will they cut a fence to come onto our property where they're not allowed to be because we have bigger fish, okay? Part of that is making sure we have our fence lines in the right place. Part of that is making sure that we're allowing the public access to where it makes sense to have the public. And then part of that is simply to ensure that we're doing the right patrols, that we have the right fences in place to deal with whether it be fishermen or it be someone wandering into a building it shouldn't be, to ensure we have security cameras at the right place, et cetera, on all of that. All of that blends together to give us a profile where we realize we have cyber that's an increasing threat, and we have threat actors that are willing to go further. And I think that's a progressive. Every year, they're willing to go a little bit further and do a little bit more damage than they were, and we have to realize that. And we have a physical security perspective, whether we want to talk about active shooter or we want to talk about any of the violence or we want to talk about the activisms kind of efforts coming out. We recognize that our society as a whole is becoming, we're seeing an increase in those types of events. We're seeing that we have to be more reactionary. They're not as rare. And therefore that requires us as a company to be more prepared to defend against it, also prepared to respond when it occurs. Does that make sense? Let me do a time check here. Okay, got it. Sounds good. We might even be ahead of schedule. Life is good. Kind of efforts. All of that comes into a picture where we have an increasing threat. And I believe my personal perspective is that CPS Energy is doing a good job. Are we doing everything that we need to? No, because we're having to build some things. We're growing, but we're on a good path. And we need to continue to invest. And we need to continue to be reactionary, responsive to the trends of our society from a physical threats, the trends of our nation from a how mad are Russia and China at us? How likely are we to go to war? Those kind of questions. If it's looking like they're going to get to that point, if we end up in the war at Ukraine or we end up in other situations that kind of remove the barriers that hold some of our enemies at bay, we absolutely need to have better defenses. We need to ramp up. And that's not a wait until the moment, but it is a scaled response because both cyber and physical are expensive. And having maximum defenses all the time is a really expensive endeavor. And we're not maxing out everything 100% because our taxpayers, our ratepayers can't afford it. And so our job is to balance that and to be able to evaluate that. And we try and do the best that we can in that space. Let me wrap up my formal comments and answer any questions that you might have for me. And we'll try and do our best to both answer anything that you'd like, as well as keep it appropriate for a public audience too in that space. But be glad to entertain any topics. Please. Sure.
Talk about, risks of... I need a mic. Okay. We talk about reducing risks and stuff. And so with a lot of the tech companies coming in, that's a risk, especially when we think about the grid and how that can be used as almost like and I say this almost cheeky, but a Trojan horse of sorts. Sure. to also impacting our grid or anything else with CPS Energy. So with circumstances like that, is CPS Energy doing anything to be proactive to reduce that risk? Is that something that you all do see as a Trojan horse of a risk? Like how are y'all mitigating that?
Sure, absolutely. So several things and concise and bringing that down kind of to a poignant question here. Mm-hmm. We are seeing a change in technology and we're seeing a change in energy systems design. Now, I will defer all energy systems design questions to my engineering friends that I get to work with, right, on what the design looks like. But let's talk about it from a security perspective. Two things. One, when we increase the importance of San Antonio, the bullseye on our back gets bigger. Doesn't matter what it is that makes it bigger. We're Military City, USA. We're becoming a data center hub. We have life science centers or life science elements that we only provide, kind of things that gives us a target to our enemies. It also provides a value to a hacker, right? Whether it be notoriety or it be financial. That provides a bigger bullseye. Some of that just means that when we do our calculation of risk, the probability factor goes up, right? We give it more weighting and therefore we apply more countermeasures or mitigations. Sometimes there are specific, and let me talk about one specific. As the grid transforms, this is where I carefully dance between engineering and security. As the grid transforms from a classic large power plant down a transmission line to a distribution grid, push it out to the resident, as we transform to individual solar, as we have electric vehicles, as we have microgrids, we're no longer at 4 or 5 plants to 800,000 homes model. We're now at 50,000 points that generate And all of them need to be part of the control network that is what feeds, what draws, where's load, where's shed, all of those things, right? So now, instead of me at a cyber level being able to draw a strong perimeter around a closed network and only have 2 or 3 gates in the castle wall, now I look at it and I say, hey, we've got to have technology that can handle 50,000 gates in the cyber wall. And how are we going to make sure no one sneaks through any of them? And especially when we don't control all the gates. So when we go out and we say, hey, we're going to partner with another company who's going to manage our asset, or we say, hey, we're going to bring a third party on to do something, or we're going to have 2 companies come together. All of those questions, it's no longer about me going over to my peer in power generation and say, hey, you're going to build a new plant, please do these things. Now it's about, hey, a resident puts a solar panel on and their internet connected solar panel controller, which was made in China, is contributing power to the grid. Great, but it's also contributing data, bits and bytes, back to CPS Energy's network. How do we protect that? Technology is coming along. That's right. It's the cyber world. We talk about the threat getting worse, but the defenses are getting better too. They're getting more complex kind of efforts. One of the big things about the question is making sure we can see data. Historically, 20 years ago, cyber was all about protect and defend the perimeter. If you can keep the bad guys out of your network, you're done. Today, it is not all about a perimeter control. It is about making sure 2 things. One, that you can see everything that's going on in the network, and that you know what good what good looks like. So if I have a solar panel on your roof and it talks to my control system that says, hey, you feed us 1 megawatt of power every day or some other number, right? And all of a sudden it says I'm feeding 1,000 megawatts, long before the power generation people go, wait a second, let me scratch my head and dig through that. My cyber people go, we have a problem. Her house can't generate that much, or it gives us some other bad number, or it sends data that's unexpected. I need to be able to see that, pick that up, take mitigating controls. A lot of stuff in artificial intelligence and data science and some other elements like that chip away at that problem. Other questions, sir?
One thing, I don't know, this is touchy, so I don't know how much you want to respond to this question, but you didn't specifically address ransomware, and I just wonder if that's something you can speak to.
I can absolutely speak to it. Let's see how well I speak to it, but we'll speak to it. Ransomware is absolutely a part of cybersecurity. It's absolutely a part of the tools that the enemy uses, and there are 2 ways that ransomware gets used. One is that a bad guy puts ransomware on a computer network and says, please give me money. So, and then when you give me money, I'll take it off. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And it's a financial money laundering scheme to try and extort money out. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2 of ransomware is that the in-between step of that is it disables computers. And there's a number of hackers out there that aren't after money, they're after destruction. And so they use the ransomware tool to deploy out on a network with no intent of ever collecting any Bitcoin or other dollars. And their whole thing is, I'm going to brick a network. Brick is just a term to disable. I'm going to disable a network and leave it in a disabled state. Couple of things on ransomware. It's become a commodity hacking service. And all I mean that it's not this specialty that only 4 or 5 hackers around the world can do. It's pretty cheap. It's pretty well known. And there's a lot of hackers attempting to use it. The price of hiring a ransomware hack is pretty cheap today on the dark web kind of effort. But that's done a few things. One, most ransomwares look alike. And what I mean by that is the defensive tools, the antivirus tools, and other automated things that are out there for us to buy and use, our partners, know what a ransomware attack looks like. And we're pretty good at spotting it. We as an industry are pretty good at spotting it. So a lot of ransomware gets caught, which is fantastic. That is awesome. We're also learning as a industry how to recover from ransomware. So we understand the importance of backups, but even more than backups, we're learning how to make a single device not so valuable. 5 years ago, you probably stored your personal laptops, you probably stored a whole bunch of data on it, right? You went on, you saved files to the desktop, My Documents, all kinds of stuff, right? Today, just think about where you store your files. They're probably online in your inbox, which is a web browser, not on your device. And they're probably stored to a OneDrive or a Google Drive or any of those other services out there so that if you lose your laptop or if your personal laptop gets ransomwared, what do? You go to Best Buy, you buy a new one, you sign in, and you're good to go. And so in that regard, ransomware has become less effective as a hacker tool. And it's not off the radar. It's not something that we dismiss and say, no, we don't have anything to worry about, because it's a very, very real threat. But it's not the panic-inducing fear, because we know how to manage it. We know how to deal with it. And we also know how to contain it. So if it starts to get into a network, if we're doing our job right, we can wrap our hands around it when it hits 30 machines instead of 3,000 or an entire corporate network. Never, ever get too confident. So it's something my team's always looking for. But it's not something that 2 or 3 years ago we were panicking over. We as an industry, not just CPS.
Jonathan, we have two questions. We have two questions in the room and one online.
Okay.
And then we'll probably have to wrap it up at
That'd
that
be fine.
point. But let me go ahead and turn it over to the online question from Dr. Cantu.
Dr. Cantu has asked, has CPS had hacks previously? If so, what was hacked and what safeguards were put in place? Again, to how much you can.
Got it. Well,
answer.
let's see what we can answer on that question. Let me answer it from an industry perspective. That's a safer answer, kind of effort. So remembering that I've been at CPS for about a year, and prior to that, I was with the federal government. And my job there was to look at critical infrastructure companies and respond to hacks. I cannot think of a single company by name that has never been hacked. To some extent or another, every company has an intrusion, and frankly, have intrusions on a fairly frequent basis. But it comes down to defining what is a hack, right? Kind of efforts. How far did they get? I'll bet all of us have gotten a phone call personally on our personal phones that says, hi, your auto insurance is about to expire. Not your insurance, your auto warranty is about to expire. Is that a hack? Well, no, not really. But are they trying to steal your money? Yeah, and they probably are. Not officially saying that. But you get my point of, were you hacked? Well, that's not really that bad a hack. Companies have the same kind of things. Do we have people at CPS Energy? Do we have hackers pounding against our networks all day long? Do they ever get past the first level of defense? Yeah, occasionally they do. That's why we have multiple layers. My job, in fact, I was just talking with my staff this morning and I said, hey, when one account gets compromised or when one laptop gets taken, how important is that? How critical? How far up the flag chain does that need to roll? Kind of things. And ultimately, and some of that's proprietary, not proprietary, but sensitive, so I won't share it in a public forum. But I will simply say that when a bad guy gets one account and we shut it down 20 seconds later, that is not a bad day in my book. I don't mind those days, right? It's the ones where it gets big. Those are the ones. And I'm proud to say that CPS Energy has not had significant major bad days on a frequent basis. We're doing well. There's some things I want to see us improve on that we're working on that we've got the endorsement of Rudy Garza and others to make those improvements over time. But we're doing really well. Other question?
Yes, one from Bob Zapata and the next one from Stephen Bonnet. Bob?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that synopsis on the security aspect in CPS. I tend to agree with you about the municipalities. In my prior job, we did gap assessments on the different, whether it's an energy company, a water utility, and in most regards, they were not very good. They didn't follow their CIP, they didn't follow the NIST rules, they didn't follow any of that stuff. So we had to do these gap assessments. So I had a similar concern with regard to the physical security. Now that we're relying more on turbines, solar cells, and how are those being managed and who manages those? Is CPS have a security model for that, or are they really independent? Because they do tie into the grid. You're dependent on them, right? So.
And you're saying on the physical realm, right?
On the physical as well as on the digital assets.
Sure. So we are right there in the middle of all the rest of the utilities that are expanding and partnering and changing the business model, right? And so kind of efforts. I'm going to say this. It depends upon the specific circumstance. We have some where we have a third party that comes in and manages our asset. And in those cases, it would generally be, we define the security parameters, cyber and physical. We go in and say, this is set up and please someone else come manage it for us. We have some where we say, we have an agreement, you have to follow certain standards, and then you push power down the line and it's your job to keep everything secure. And we've defined requirements for them. Okay. I think the harder ones and the places that my team spends a lot of time grinding through are the ones where it's partnerships of you do some and we do some, and we have to make sure we don't miss anything in the middle. And we do a lot of due diligence to go through and make sure that as part of our negotiations, that we have comprehensive coverage. I think we're doing a good job. But I also think that as we do more of this in the future, and I think that's the trend we're going towards, we need to make sure that we don't relax in that effort, because otherwise the bad guy will come through the crack. We have to be right all the time. They only have to be right 1% kind of elements. It's those kinds of things. If they fail, they get to try again. If we fail, they're in kind of efforts. And so that's the area that I'm applying the most diligence to.
Okay. And then on related to question that, do you get assessed by an external group or internally? Do you have internal gap?
Both. So we have multiple layers. Within my team, I have a team that assesses my team. So I have my operational people who do their job, and then I have people that watch over them to make sure that they follow the processes. That's every single day. We have an internal audit team. We have an internal compliance team. And on a regular basis, we just finished one about one of our topical areas kind of thing. They come in and they say, we're going to do an audit on how well you do this. They look to make sure we do what we say we're supposed to do. And they also look to make sure we do it at the industry standards. And then we also have third parties that come in. Sometimes that's regulatory, like a NERC audit. Sometimes that's a cyber-specific audit. They come in and they do a comprehensive, whether it's a pen test or a controls valuation, and we do those on a more than annual basis as well. So we have multiple layers of validation there. And all of them come back and they say, you're doing fairly well. Here's the areas, here's the gaps. Here's the areas for improvement. I don't think I've ever seen anyone ever come back and say, you're perfectly good, you have nothing to do. They always have something, but we do go through all those layers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And one last
Last
question for Mr. Stephen Bonnet.
Yeah, you said in the beginning of your presentation that you were more concerned about the security with the city of San Antonio than you are with CPS. So if someone were able to hack in the city of San Antonio, does that open up vulnerability to CPS, or is there some kind of a firewall in that?
Sure.
And then I've got a second question that is ERCOT involved in any of this cybersecurity at all?
Perfect. Let me see if I can dissect all of that one question into 17. Okay, so I'll take it. Let me clarify what I meant when I said city of San Antonio, and then I'll also answer the tactical too. When I say I'm more worried about the security of the city of San Antonio, I mean the security of our community and the resilience and stability, right? If CPS Energy gets hacked and they steal all our spreadsheets and they shut down our corporate domain, that's a really bad day. But if the city still has power, our economy survives. If, on the other hand, they don't steal our spreadsheets, but they shut off the power to the entire city, that's a really, really bad day. And so my number one priority is to keep the power flowing down the lines, the gas in the pipes, kind of things. That is the most critical thing we deliver, and our commitment is to our customers in that space. And that's what I meant there. Now, do we have connections between the city of San Antonio, the proper governmental unit, and us from a network perspective? There's a few places that we exchange data, and there's some connections and some trusts, but those are well validated. There are firewalls between, there's data inspection points, there's a bunch of other things. I do not feel worried that if the city were compromised by a cyber attack, that they would pivot over into our networks with any significant risk in that space. I would feel bad for them. We would help them. That's part of the overall RSOC model, is that we would come to their aid, but it would be to help them recover their networks. We would not be at significant risk from their compromise. Repeat your last question. Got it. Sure. So there are connections with ERCOT. We have absolute data exchanges that go back and forth. Those are well protected. And what I mean by that is two things. One, it all runs, for the most part, all of those connections run under NERC controls. We were talking earlier about SIP and some other things like that. They have strict standards that they have to follow, and they are undefined, what I'll call a tunnel or channel. In other words, we talk to them. It's the only thing that data stream is used for. If anybody else tried to come in from the side or something like that, we'd notice kind of efforts. But that is a very transactional level type of thing, right? If ERCOT had a compromise, I don't worry too much that they would come and compromise us. But I do worry that if ERCOT got compromised and the data stopped flowing, or their calculations were wrong, or they sent us bad data, or the data was delayed, or all kinds of things with messing with their data, and we used their data not knowing it was bad, that could be bad for us. Same thing on our side. If we got compromised and we were sending ERCOT bad data, we'd have impacts on the grid. And I think we'd have to get into some pretty specific use cases to figure out how significant. But there is an absolute trust barrier. It's not a hack one network, get to the other problem nearly as much as it is the critical dependency upon one another's data. Okay, I'll wrap up. Thank you. Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you. That was a spectacular presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'd certainly like to have you back sometime and talk about artificial intelligence. but
I will
we'll
come
do
back
that
anytime
today.
you will like. So I appreciate being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you so very much. All right, Chair Kelly, you can take the committee into roundtable.
Right. Okay, we're now going to go into executive session, and the reason for that is we're going to have a presentation on the ongoing litigation that CPS is involved in regarding the Winter Storm Uri and some of the charges that we faced out of that. So it's quite understandable that some of that can't be released so publicly. So I do want to caution and remind all of us on the committee that we did sign a confidentiality agreement, and the information that we'll hear in executive session, we need to be careful to keep that close to the vest and not share that information. So with that comment, I guess, Yvonne, we're ready for you to introduce our I
Happy
guess
to-
we need to get the recording.
Well,
Stop.
before we do, I just wanted to double check with you. Did you want to spend a little bit, you have a little bit of time for roundtable if you'd like to engage in roundtable?
Oh, okay. I want to do that ahead of time. Okay. Yeah, sure. We can, how much time do we have?
You have until 12:40, sir. So
Okay.
11 minutes.
Okay, well, let's open it up then. One of the things I did want to remind everybody and reinforce is that I am certainly open to your thoughts about topics that we'd like to hear about. I know that Dr. Cantu had proposed a topic that we'll talk about, hear about next month. But if anybody else has ideas or suggestions, topics they'd like to hear about, please, let's think about that now. Thank you. Nobody? Even Tom? Tom, even you? No comment?
Thank you, Tom. I have a question because a resident asked me this the other day and I really have forgotten about it, but it's to staff on the rebate or the refund that CPS Energy in the city. Has anything become of that, or is there still conversation as to how that is going to be distributed? I really have forgotten all about it, but I was asked by a resident. And if you can't answer, it's certainly okay, but I did say I would ask.
It sounds like what the resident was requesting is basically how much was returned, how many folks opted into the credit and opted out of the credit. I can get that information and share that with y'all. Yeah, I don't have it handy, but I mean, I can get that.
And those credits, though, were provided to the customers on their December bill. Yeah, so they wouldn't have received anything physically, but they would have noticed maybe a slight difference in their December bill due to that credit. So you might want to advise a resident to review that December bill, and they can go onto our website to access their account and review that bill. And that's where they would see the credit, and it's all dependent on their own personal usage.
One thing I'll throw out, you at your place, for those of you that are here in person, we have some articles that I asked Yvonne to print out for us. For those that are not here, I believe we're going to mail those, right, Yvonne? Or if people wanted to have them mailed.
I'm sorry, repeat that, sir.
The articles that we have here.
Yes, we'll be sending the PDF versions to those that are participating online.
Okay.
And I do believe we also have a question for you from the WebEx. Is it Frank? Okay, we have a question from Frank.
Okay. Before we go to Frank, just real quickly, I don't want to burden everybody with sending out too many of these articles, but it seems like particularly this past spring, to date at least, we've had a lot of articles about the grid and other electric generation issues and the rates and so forth. It seemed like there was a lot of interesting articles. I don't know if everybody on the committee reads the newspaper on a regular basis. Nowadays, less people do. And so I don't want to bore you with too much information, but on the other hand, I've tried to watch, and anybody else can as well. If you see an interesting article, that you feel like the rest of the committee might benefit from having a chance to read. I think that's good. I've sent a couple, I think, that were probably somewhat and to some degree kind of opinion pieces. I'm not suggesting that I necessarily agree with all the opinions, but at least it's interesting, and I think we should be aware of what's on people's minds out in the community. All right, so Frank had a comment.
Hi, thank you. I would like to talk about the increase in solar vendors and the increase of problematic issues between installation and process of installing them. I've been reading a lot of reports and I've been seeing a lot of door-to-door salespeople come through. Most of them are not licensed and bonded in San Antonio. And there's been reports across the country where third parties are installing solar panels. Half of them work, or they work at 20%, work at 0%, and are working too much. And then there's no, anywhere in the United States, there's no set regulation on solar panels, on who's liable and who is the trustworthy person to make sure that, one, they are working, and two, our customers are not victims to these, sometimes they're schemes. And the way things are with solar panels, they're not getting any cheaper, but they definitely are phasing out every 5 years. It's starting to, I'm starting to see that there's a growing problem and an increased problem between now that it's sunny all the way to about late fall, when it's peak season for them to start selling, going door to door, and where most of our issue starts. I know for the city side, there's not an established permit or regulatory process for solar panels. But on the CPS side, from what I've seen, the only thing we have going for us is, one, we vet out the vendors. Two, we don't have a process to where their solar panels are actually working optimized or properly in the area. So maybe I'm looking for further input in where in CPS we can, more or less lead that conversation or lead that topic.
I can tell you that, the solar installers are supposed to be obtaining the proper permitting, from the municipalities that they're operating in order to do the installation. But I would be happy to, talk with our folks that lead our STEP program, and, we can, and maybe our customer engineering and design group as well, relative to solar installations.
You're supposed to have a permit though.
All right. Good comment, Richard. Anybody else have any thoughts before we move forward?
This is Tom. In this spirit of additional topics, I bring this up for consideration that in all of the topics that we bring up, whatever there be technology, be process, be legal, what have you, that we take a tact of what can we bring back to citizens and what citizen input does CPS need, right? And, our cyber example was a perfect one, right? Where, what is the net that citizens can do to help, forgot your name, Jonathan, to do his job better, right? To keep CPS and the citizens safe, right? What is that those citizens need to do? Can we help in that regard? Or, what perspective do citizens have that could make your job easier or more informed? Things like that, right? So I would like to hear from other people in CPS, staff or otherwise, to come back to us and say, hey, here's what we need to understand about the users, business or residential, and here's some input we'd like to collect. So that would be a topic for us.
Okay.
To consider.
I think that would feed into, I remember when I spoke to Ed Kelly right before he left the board, he was saying that he felt like that the CAC could provide a lot of valuable input to the board. But I think we can only do that if we've really kind of tried to collect that information and input from the citizens. We're kind of that interface.
I guess that's what I'm teeing up.
Right.
Is that process.
Right. Okay. All right, without any further discussion, then I guess we will move into executive session and
I thought you were going to go around. I'm sorry.
oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, Bob.
So I did have a request or a question. First of all, on the ERCOT question that you had earlier, we didn't really, I thought about it afterward. The PUC is the big dog in the room. They're the ones that run it all. But I have a few more comments after the meeting I can share with you. Related to that, I was on trying to find that we went to Austin. It was awesome. I learned a lot about the process, good or bad. It is a process. But I went on the government website to try to find the bills that are related or of interest to us. Unbelievable. There's like 30 different topics. I couldn't find them. Is it possible to get a list of what might impact us that might be of interest so we could start following? Because there's a way to follow those bills on the webpage.
Yeah, I think we can get that. Yeah, it's going to be a pretty long list, but I think we can get that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Julia's saying that it might have been about 400 that are being tracked, that are being tracked. Because remember, it's more than just, bills that are impacting how we generate and distribute power. But there may be bills impacting, the workforce, or maybe bills, impacting, financial things. So there's, a lot of different realms, if you will, because this industry is so expansive that we'll be covering. But like I said, we could maybe, I can talk with Kathy in her state and federal team, and maybe we could just narrow it down to something a little bit more.
And we're not trying to get a highway named after CPS Energy, are we? Because there's like 100 of them in there. If it's
Maybe we can boil it down into themes.
there's some things that of interest. Okay. Yeah, that'd be interesting because I was trying to follow through. I just got lost. I got down to the M's. I gave up. I said, no more. So anyway, that'd be interesting. That way you could follow kind of where they go through committee and such. So, okay. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have any final comments in our roundtable discussion at this point? All right. I guess not seeing any more. Yvonne, I guess we'll move into executive session then.
Question on procedure. Do we need to adjourn the open session and then we stop recording and?
So at this time, if the roundtable discussion is finished, Chair Kelly, we will go ahead and transition over to executive session. The executive session is only for CAC members. So those staff members that are on the WebEx, please go ahead and disconnect at this time. Once the executive session concludes, and again, no votes or decisions will be made. But once the session concludes, the meeting will then be adjourned. Thank you. So please stand by.